Welcome to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership, where you'll hear insights and useful strategies, as well as lessons learned from other nonprofit leaders and valuable tips from a variety of experts. Here to help you with the challenges and opportunities you face day after day is your host and nonprofit leadership expert, Sarah Olivieri.
Hello, nonprofit leaders, and welcome to your go-to place for information and inspiration to help you be even more effective. I'm your host, Sarah Olivieri, and you're listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. My guest for this episode is Linda Lysakowski, a distinguished nonprofit expert and one of just 100 professionals worldwide with the Advanced Certified Fundraising Executive designation, ACFRE. She also holds certifications as a nonprofit consultant, nonprofit executive, and development executive. With over 35 years in the field, Linda has managed numerous capital campaigns and helped countless nonprofits achieve their fundraising goals. And she has trained more than 50,000 professionals across North America and internationally. She is also a prolific author and has written or contributed to over 36 books, including The Development Plan and Capital Campaigns in the Digital Age. And she has some new books coming out soon, one of which we're going to be talking about today. She's a sought-after speaker and has presented at AFP International Conference, AFP Hemispheric Conference, and many other major events. Linda, it is such a pleasure to have you here today. Before we dive into nonprofit-y stuff, would you just tell us a little bit about yourself personally?
Well, I could probably take the whole meeting just to talk about what's going on in my personal life. I'm as prolific at having progeny as I am writing books, I guess. I have, right now I have 4 living children. I had 2 others that are not living, 9 grandchildren, 14 great-grandchildren, and I recently had my second great-great-grandchild. Wow. So that keeps me, it doesn't keep me very busy because I have not been very close to anybody in my family geographically. However, I'm in the process of moving to Missouri I'm going to live with one of my granddaughters and her husband and 3 children. But I guess in my personal life, the most recent thing I've done was at the age of 81, gotten my master's degree from the Franciscan School of Theology at University of San Diego. So I just graduated in May with that. And I'm a believer in lifelong learning, which is why I've written so many books and why I do a lot of webinars and courses, because I really believe we all have something to learn no matter how old we are. So that's my mantra of life is lifelong learning.
I love that. Well, kind of related to your new degree, you have a new book coming out about reimagining philanthropy and religion. So can you just kind of introduce us to that topic?
Well, it's a topic that I don't think many people have written about. And I guess I got inspired to write about it because I'm very involved in my own church currently, and we're in the process of doing a campaign. And I've worked with numbers of religious-based organizations, either churches, or I've worked with 4 different denominations in church camps. I currently am working with a Presbyterian church camp. And I find that philanthropy and religion is something that is really hard for many people to grasp with because they don't feel that religion should be asking for money. And yet every church and every faith-based nonprofit needs money to survive, just like every other nonprofit does. So I interviewed a number of people. I interviewed Muslims, I interviewed rabbis, I interviewed Catholic priests, Presbyterian ministers, and other faith-based groups to just kind of get a feel for what they found the biggest challenges are in church-based fundraising. And some of it, I think, relates to the fact that out of all the people that I've talked to, whether they went to seminary or whatever kind of training they got, they get very little training in things like business management and fundraising. And then all of a sudden they're made a pastor or a rabbi in charge of a church that obviously needs money to operate. And they don't have the background to do it because they've studied theology and pastoral work. So it's a challenge, I think, for many organizations to really come to grips with this. And that's why I wanted to write something, because in my talking to different people, I found that every religion has something to say about stewardship and why it is important to support your faith-based group, whether it's a church, synagogue, a mosque, whatever it is. They always need to raise money. So I'm trying to get people over that hump of thinking that, as one of the priests that I talked to said, he thinks one of the problems with raising money in churches is people hear the saying in scripture that love of money is the root of all evil, but they forget that love of money and they just say money is the root of all evil. So why should churches be talking about it?
Yeah.
And it's not money itself that's the root of evil. It's people who are so in love with money that that's their greatest possession and they feel like it's theirs and they want to keep it. So I think, the mindset has to change. I'm hoping this book will help people change the mindset about fundraising in general.
Can you enumerate, like, as you did your interviews, what were some of the challenges that came out?
Well, as I said, one of the big challenges was that most people felt unprepared to do fundraising. One of the Catholic priests that I talked to said the way they usually learn fundraising is they're made an assistant pastor first, and they learn from the pastor how they go about raising money. And some of them really get it, but a lot of them are very uncomfortable talking about money. And one of the things that I think is really important is that they get the lay people involved in this and make it, we as parishioners or members of a congregation, we understand why it's so important to raise money to keep this building alive. My church, for example, is about, the building is about, the church itself is over almost 100 years old, but the building we're in currently is about 40 years old. And of course, living in a home, a 40-year-old home starts to develop things like leaks in the roof.
And those take money to fix, for sure.
Yes, they definitely do. So I think some people really feel reluctant to get up there and talk about money because they feel like their job is to talk about faith and having people grow in their faith. And I agree that it is, but I think lay people can do a lot to encourage this, like having the lay people get up and talk about a campaign that they may be in the process of running and why they're running it. The church camp that I work with and I've worked with 4 different church camps, and I really found in every one of them that many people who went to camp as a teenager or even younger than a teenager report back that it really helped strengthen their faith. And many people that came in out of those camps became ministers. One that I worked with was a Moravian church, and the bishop himself was really enthused about this because he went to camp as a new person in this country, and he said it really changed his life. So I think we don't realize that things that we're doing can change people's lives, and that is certainly worth investing in, I think.
Yeah.
So even though we might think, leaking roofs and needing new air conditioners isn't a very glamorous thing, but in our church, we're also in the process of doing some more faith-based things like building a prayer garden and things like that. So all of those things take money, and we have to face the reality. And I think that's the biggest challenge for people, is facing that reality of not wanting to appear like money is the only thing they're concerned about. They're concerned about the souls of the people they're reaching in their congregation. But it takes money to do the kind of things that do help people build their
Yeah.
faith. So I think that's the biggest challenge that most people seem to have in this
It
area.
seems like, so often when people struggle with money for any reason in other nonprofits,
Right.
personally, it's so often a mindset thing. And that's not surprising, right? Because money itself is a creation of the human mind, right? Like it doesn't, especially as it
Right.
exists today, it doesn't really have an intrinsic value. It only has the value we prescribe to it. So it could kind of become anything
Right.
we want. So, what do you find? Did you find that there were some challenges around fundraising or mindset that existed for churches that don't exist for other nonprofits?
Well, as I said, I think with other nonprofits, they have, it's kind of similar, really, when you come to think of it. Nonprofits focus on their mission, but I have a colleague who, Jimmy LaRose, some of you may be familiar with him, and he does a lot of training on this topic of raising money. And he says something that sometimes intimidates nonprofits because they're so focused on their mission. But he says, the money is more important than the mission because it's the oxygen. And I think that the mission of an organization, whether it's a church or another nonprofit, is kind of the lifeblood. It's why they exist. But in order for us to have a healthy lifeblood flowing through our bodies, we need our lungs to pump oxygen into that blood. And I think that's how the nonprofit should think about this too. It's without money, there is no mission, because you can't serve the people that you want to serve in the ways that you want to serve them. So I think it is a lot like other nonprofits. I think the main difference is the mindset of people that, oh, we shouldn't be talking about money. We're a church, and we should just be focused on saving people's souls or building a stronger community within our organization. And all those things are important, but the money has to come too, or the other things won't follow. So in many ways, I think it's just like other nonprofits, but maybe more so because people who are trained in religion are not trained to go out and ask for money in most cases.
Yeah.
So it's some people very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a quick break, but we're going to come back in just a few moments to hopefully learn maybe a little about what churches can do, and specifically a little bit more about what's in the new book. The Inspired Nonprofit Leadership Podcast is here to assist people like you, executive directors, board members, and other nonprofit leaders. And I want to help you unleash your full potential to advance the missions that I know you care about so deeply. I've been an executive director, a board member, and now I'm a consultant and coach. I know your challenges firsthand, and I want to bring you information, inspiration, and encouragement so that you can have the greatest impact possible. So my gift for you today, in addition to this episode itself, is a newsletter where you can receive bite-sized weekly tips for nonprofit leaders just like you. And you can access it by going to pivotground.com/sign up to access the newsletter. And I'll also put a link in the show notes. All right, let's get back to our conversation with Linda. What's the title of your new book? When's it coming out, and who's it for?
Okay, it's entitled Reimagining Philanthropy and Religion, because I think normally the two don't go together. And the subtitle is Fundraising is Not a Dirty Word. And I guess what I'm trying to accomplish there is to get people to see right away from the title, oh, fundraising is part of our ministry, whatever that might be. And so in the book, I did a lot of research to get ready for this book. I'm not sure the actual publication date. It's in the process right now of being edited and laid out. So I'll certainly let you know when the publication date is released. But some of the research I did was quite interesting. And I think I got inspired to write this book by Henri Nouwen. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a Roman Catholic priest and theologian. And he wrote a book called The Spirituality of Fundraising. And it's a very quick read. And he talks a lot about why fundraising is important. And he says what all nonprofits, I think, know, that you have to have an exciting vision for people, that they don't usually like to give for things like we talked about, the leaking roofs and all those things. But if you have a vision that you want to make your church a welcoming place and a place that people feel inspired to come to, you do need to have some of those amenities. So I got really inspired by Henri Nouwen, but his book doesn't talk much about the practical side of how to do fundraising. So I wanted to take it to the next level. And so I started researching. He talks about what's in scripture, that scripture supports philanthropy. And I found in all the religions that I talked to, there was something that talked about the whole process of philanthropy. And the one that I was really struck by was Islam. And I didn't know that. I have friends that are Muslim, and I've worked with people in that area, but I didn't know much about the tenets of the religion itself. And when I looked at what they believe in, there's 5 pillars of Islam, and one of those pillars out of the 5 is zakat, which is charity. And Muslims are actually required, if you want to be considered a good Muslim, to give a certain percentage of your money. And there are other Christian denominations that follow tithing, and so it is something that's respected in all religions. And I found quotes in the Quran. I found quotes in the Hebrew Bible, or the Old Testament, as Christians would call it. I found in the Christian Bible a lot of different quotes about how philanthropy is required. And a lot of Christian churches believe, they call it almsgiving, but it's the same thing as zakat. And I think it tells people that they are required to care for each other. And that's really what it's all about, is caring for your neighbor. And if you care for your neighbor, you're going to have to support that institution. So what I did in the book was try to take it more to a practical level, like telling people how to write a case for support that is an exciting vision for people, as Henri Nouwen says, and how to go about raising money in your church, and how to involve the lay people and volunteers in this, because sometimes ministers and priests and rabbis feel like they have to do all the fundraising. And as with any nonprofit, you can't just be focused on fundraising as the leadership of the group. You have to involve volunteers. So I talked to them about the role of volunteers in fundraising and how they can help. And we talk about some practical things like using electronic media, your website, blogs, podcasts, things like that, to encourage people to give to your organization. So I tried to take it down to the practical level. It starts out on the more esoteric level of why philanthropy is important in religion, in all religions. And I certainly didn't examine every single religion, because there's hundreds of them throughout the world. But I tried to focus on some of the main ones that people are most familiar with, and larger religions. And it's certainly nothing that anybody should be ashamed of. It's really getting people to give of their time, talent, and treasure is really important. So while we don't want to focus only on the treasure, we want people giving their time, we want people giving their talent, but we also need people to give of their treasure at an appropriate level. And one of the other things that I find is very prevalent especially in the religious world, but I found that other places too, is the idea of fair share. And people don't quite understand that. They think, well, okay, so if we have 600 members and they all give $100, math is not my strong suit here. I think that's $600,000, but it never happens that way. There are people who can give you $100,000 and there are other people who can give you $100. And so trying to discern what's appropriate for people so that everyone is giving not at an equal share, but an equal sacrifice. And that, I think, is a critical factor in religious fundraising as well as other fundraising.
I think that applies
too.
in all fundraising. And I was just having a conversation with I have just a few for-profit clients. Almost all my clients are nonprofits, but we were talking about pricing. And really, it comes to, who are you serving? For some people, an offer something you're providing or, just putting it out there. And the same for donors. If you're looking for $10 chunks, it's going to speak to a certain group.
Right.
But a group that's used to spending money or giving money in $10,000 chunks or $100,000 chunks, they're not going to hear the call for the $10 chunks because that's not on their radar. So, if you want, to be attracting donors or, if you're for-profit clients or your church or, your membership who are going to give large amounts, you need to ask large amounts, not just so you can get big bucks, but so that you speak their language, right? And so you have to, those different asks are a form of communication, not just dollar amounts, right? They speak to different people in different ways. One person's $100 is another person's $1,000, and it just depends on their orientation. This is really great points. I think it's just so interesting, this conversation, as someone I'm not involved with church fundraising at all, but when I think about what motivates people to give, I often think of religion because so many religions have some sort of scripture or something like built in saying that philanthropy is good and that you should be doing it. So it's kind of interesting to hear about, churches and other religious, organizations then struggling with that for themselves, which I think really resonates with me as in our nonprofit space, our space of givers and caregivers. We often struggle to give for our own community well-being. But that's so important, I think. Any final words you would give to our audience of advice about how they move forward if they're involved with church or religious organization fundraising?
Well, I think something you said really resonated with me, and I do include this in my book, that so many times we don't, if we have a group of people, let's say they're volunteering for their church or their synagogue, and they think of things like, oh, let's have a bake sale, let's have a rummage sale or whatever. And they're not thinking in terms of what the big donors are thinking of. They're speaking a whole different language. And I think, sadly, a lot of times we nickel and dime people with these small things. And then when it comes to making a big ask, if they do need, for instance, a capital campaign where they need to raise money to put on a new roof or whatever it might be that they're in need of, people get tired of being nickeled and dimed. Well, I just gave to this thing $10 and I gave.
They're like, if you needed 10,000, why didn't you ask for 10,000? Because it was just as easy for me to give you 10,000 as it was 10. But now you've given me twice the amount of work because you asked for $10 and then you asked for 10,000, right?
Right. And so I think that is probably one of the biggest takeaways that I try to get through in this book is to stop nickel and diming people. Yes, it's good to ask for a weekly or monthly donation or however in a smaller level, but when you need something big, don't be afraid to ask for it, because there are people, as you say, that can easily give $10,000, $100,000, and you've got to learn to speak their language and really relate to them. And that's why having volunteers involved in this fundraising, I think, is good, because if you have someone on your team who is a major donor or can be a major donor themselves, they're going to know the language to speak to the other people in your congregation that can give a major gift. So I think that was I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to mention that. So I think first of all, I think that as far as tips, to look at your scriptures, and every religion has some holy scripture that they follow, and they almost all have good things to say about philanthropy and why it's important for us to give of our gifts, like I said, time, talent, and treasure. And it's easy sometimes to ask for the time and talent, but we don't want to ask for the treasure. And there's nothing wrong with it. I haven't found a single religion that says don't ask for money. So I think that is one lesson, and just getting the volunteers involved that can help the leadership, because leadership of most religious congregations wants to focus on the spiritual aspect and not on the money. So I think those are probably the two biggest tips I could say, is look at your scripture and try to get an understanding of what philanthropy means. And you mentioned also that, I don't know if you mentioned this specifically, but if you're familiar with the book Giving USA, and you look at who gives money and who gets money, like 80% of all giving in the United States, and I found that in other countries this is similar too, comes from individuals.
Yeah.
And also the biggest recipient of money is always religion, because most people, and I used to sort of say this a little bit with tongue in cheek, that the reason religion or get so much money is they're the only ones who ask for it every week.
That's right. I mean, imagine those
true.
those other nonprofits out there. If you held an event every week where you asked for money, you'd probably be rolling it. You give some value, you ask for some money in return. You did it every week, year in and year out, with some bonus events along the way. That would be an amazing fundraising model for sure.
But it does seem like, people really give to their religion for various reasons, in their estates. And that's another thing I talk about is, doing some estate planning, and you're helping your members too, because they need to make wise decisions about their estate, whether they have children or not. And so that's an area that many congregations can really benefit from.
I love it. Well, before we wrap up, I know we're going to have some links for folks in the show notes, but what's your favorite way for people to reach out to you?
Okay. They can email me at linda@lindalysakowski.com. And I have several websites. One is lindalysakowski.com that talks about my consulting services and my books. And then I have another one called learnwithlinda.online. And that's where I have all my courses. I have about 20 courses now, including one on religion and fundraising, where I get into this in a lot more detail. And I'm starting a new website called Spiritual Writings with Linda, because I have written already about 5 spiritual books, and I'm going to be writing another one this summer too. So based on my capstone project when I got my master's degree from a Franciscan university. So,
excellent. Mm-hmm.
But Linda Lysakowski will give you the easiest way to access me by email.
Great. And we have those in the show notes. Linda, it's been such a pleasure to have you. And thank you out there for listening, but also for all that you do to make our communities better. Take care of yourself and take some time for self-care and to support your community, whether it's a church, community center, a club, or whatever community means to you. And be sure to subscribe and listen to the next episode of Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Until then, all the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.